Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Grafana Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. I have a coworker with me today that you may not have met yet, Paul.
Paul Baylog, developer advocate here at Grafana Labs.
And today we have a special guest who's external to Grafana Labs, but a good friend nonetheless, Adnan Rahić from Tracetest. Rahić. Oh, I practiced this and I still got it wrong. Adnan
Yeah,
Rahić from Tracetest.
thank you for the intro. And yeah, I mean, everybody gets it wrong. It's very hard to say that in any American accent or any English speaking accent, or basically any accent that is not Eastern European. It's very hard. So yeah,
Well, tell us
but yeah,
about yourself.
yeah,
Why do you have such a difficult to pronounce name?
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. What were they thinking?
Yeah. I mean, the name itself, Adnan, is very Arabic. So people from the Middle East looking at this white dude sitting here go like that. This is weird. That's gonna be probably the first thing that they're gonna be thinking about. But no, I'm Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Balkans. Actually, so if you know Croatia and Dubrovnik, everybody knows Dubrovnik because of the Game of Thrones thing. Is the country right next to it? That's basically it. So, very Slavic, very Slavic. So yeah, it's a quick intro on why my name is so difficult to pronounce and very confusing. Uh, Apart from that, yeah, I'm doing DevRel at Tracetest. So yeah, I'm the person that does all of these fun interactions with people. Who would have imagined that this would have been a job 5 years ago? When we were doing actual engineering, and now we're doing people engineering. Yeah.
Oh, that's really fancy. Oh, we have one of our engineers, Mihail Stoikov, who's saying I'm asking all the hard questions. I
Yeah.
haven't begun.
And then obviously, he would know how difficult names are, especially in the Cyrillic. Try reading that.
Right.
You know,
That's
a
right.
fun
He's
fact,
just
I do
around
know
the
Cyrillic
corner
as
in
well. So
Bulgaria.
I do read it. I just don't understand what I'm saying, but I read it because it's phonetic. Anyway, here I am giving you a hard time for your name when my name is notoriously difficult to spell.
yeah, I have
Oops, did
copy
we
paste.
lose Adnan already?
Oh,
Uh-huh.
did you? Am I back?
There we
Yes,
are.
you
Yeah.
are now.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, doing slides is hard with your name because I kind of have to look at it twice, and then I just give up. I do copy paste, and then it's just that makes it easier.
That's okay. I forgive you. So, Adnan, I think you and I met at KubeCon earlier this year,
Mhm.
and we were talking about trace test because we had already done something with trace test and K6, which I think that whole thing was what you were demonstrating at KubeCon as well, right?
Yeah. We met at KubeCon in Amsterdam. It was in late May, I think it was. No, April. I can't quite remember when it was, but it was
May,
in
I think.
May. Yeah, it was. It was wild. It was a wild week. A lot of a lot of working and not a lot of eating. So I lost a few pounds there, or kilograms for European normal measurements. um, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was a time right after we did an integration with K6, and we did demo that integration as part of our few demos that we wanted to show people, and we're really happy to say that the K6 integration is by far the most popular that we've seen across both the documentation and the website and just general use. So a lot of people are really hyped about the K6 integration with Tracetest. So that's really cool. And yeah, let's see if we can make that same thing happen with Grafana. That's kind of the next step right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that this is just like a logical progression. I think most people either start with observability and then go towards testing, and start with testing and go towards observability and do both. Hopefully, they end up doing both. But maybe let's take a step back here and talk about like why microservices based architectures are just difficult to monitor.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest thing here is that, I mean, as cloud native apps have evolved, nothing is really nothing is really centralized anymore. A lot of these cloud native apps are running across different services across a cloud provider. And then, of course, if you're running Kubernetes and you have microservices, then that's just another step in that distribution within your infrastructure. You don't really have insight into what's happening, and that's where I think this new approach of observability with tracing is key. Because if you're thinking of, let's say you have a microservice with or microservice architecture with different services, and then you have message queues, and then you have Redis, and then you have worker processes, or even Lambda functions, or even, you know, it's very hard to see what's happening. And it's not until you really plug in distributed tracing when it gets manageable. But then again, this step of observability, it's still not the first thing a developer thinks about. It's not observability driven development yet. And that's something that at Tracetest, at least, we're trying to grow a bit of awareness around that and why it's important. Because I'm thinking, my mindset is the developer should already be thinking about observability whilst they're writing their code. And that for me makes a lot of sense, because if you're writing the code, you're going to be fixing the code if something breaks. You're going to be troubleshooting that if something breaks. So it's very hard for a DevOps person seeing errors in Grafana and they see, oh, so this trace is broken. It's very hard for them to make sense of why that is and what's happening, because they didn't write the instrumentation. The developer did. So it's a circle of, I think, blaming one another instead of working together. I would say I would like that to be shifted in a bit, where it's going to be more collaboration and less blame. I would say that would be the a very nice thing to look forward to.
Uh-oh, we lost your mic.
Oops, sorry about that. I just accidentally hardware muted myself because, you know, apparently having done 100 of these is not enough to stop me from doing that. I was going to say, it sounds like in terms of backgrounds, I'm from the testing side, and it sounds like you both are from the ops side. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, Paul,
I'm more of a code monkey.
And development, yeah. But you also are more into cloud native stuff than I have been. What's your take on this observability driven development?
So to me, it's very cool, because I mean, yeah, if you don't have observability, you're kind of I don't know, what is it, a foot gun? I think I've heard that. You know, you're basically shooting yourself. You have to have that in there. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a little weird being, you know, in my American dialect and everything, but yeah, I don't know. I heard it somewhere, foot gun. But yeah, you're shooting yourself if you don't bring that all in. And then to be able to have this with the traces in there, that's even more cool. That's why, yeah, Tracetest, I've been pretty stoked about it since I first heard about it and met Ken and some of the other folks there. Oscar, I believe, Oscar Reyes. So yeah, no, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing, is that observability as a movement has evolved drastically because cloud native has forced it to, because we don't really know. With traditional logs and metrics, we still don't know what's happening. Yeah. Because if you get a bucket of logs, like, how do you, like, this is just a bucket of data. There's no sense what's happening, right? And we've had that pain. And then we see observability is evolving so rapidly with tracing, and generally because first OpenTelemetry project, and then a lot of vendors supporting that standard as well, is just evolving so rapidly, where right now I feel as the testing is the bottleneck. So I think that's the step. I mean, Nicole probably knows much more than I do, but have you ever tested Lambda functions, or have you ever tested cloud native stuff? And how fun is that?
About as fun as it is to maintain them, probably.
You see, that's my point, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest things in testing is that when I started, we kind of treated the application as a black box. So because I'm not a developer or an ops engineer, by experience, we just kind of thought, okay, whatever happens in there happens. Let's see, what we can control as the input, and then we can measure the output. And that's why there's this shift now where now testers are like, oh, actually, what if we could see what's happening in that black box? And it's like, oh, revelation of revelations. It's actually a lot better when you have more information, right? But you were talking about these silos that form between dev and test, or test and ops, or dev and ops. And now everything's coming together and everyone has access to the same information. And lo and behold, it's actually better when there are more eyes on a problem.
Oh, for sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, obviously, black box testing has its use case. It's very useful for certain use cases, but I don't see it being that useful for what cloud native and for what microservices are doing right now. You need to know what's happening across the entire transaction.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking of right now is like I hated doing mocking 5 years ago. I can only imagine how hard and how horrible it is to do mocking right now, where I have to mock the output of one service, and then my service that I'm testing has to have whatever, and then the external service have to mock that. And it's just when you're doing complex integration tests or end-to-end tests where you have to chain different, let's say you have one post request and one get request, and then whatever happens after that, how do you mock that? How do you, it's 7 days of writing the plumbing and 7 minutes of writing the logic. Like, why would I want to do that, right? That's why people end up not doing any testing, which is wrong. I think we should, I mean, did I say that?
Right. It takes too much time.
What do you mean people don't do testing? Everybody does testing. When you mean? No, it's just the time investment. I don't think stakeholders or like CEOs or whoever, when you tell a CEO, yeah, we're gonna do 3 weeks of only tests, and then go like, but what about features? No features. Who's gonna like that? Nobody's gonna like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. We need to figure out a way of making that step of actually pushing out reliable tests quickly an option, right? So I think that's the next step.
Yeah, and I
That
think
whole
that
shift
is
left.
partially because it's siloed, right? If you look at testing as a separate activity, then it's a lot easier to think like, oh, well, we don't really need that, right? We have development, and then let's just push it, and then let's test in production, which really sometimes is code for not testing at all. But if you kind of develop a culture where testing is incorporated into development and also with observability, then you're kind of shifting left and right and everywhere. And it's not like, oh, this one thing we're not doing. It's like, no, that's just part of everything that we do. We test everything.
So you mean integrating it more into the life cycle or the development life cycle, or whatever we want to call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like test driven development as well, and unit tests, and all the way through that chain. But why don't we talk about what trace test even is?
Sure. So I think I have one very nice slide that explains it perfectly.
Sure.
It is, to the point, the modern way of doing testing, where you're using your existing trace infrastructure, so your existing OpenTelemetry instrumentation, your existing traces, where you trigger a test and then you write the assertions both on the trace data and the response itself. So this is the magical part, where if you have a microservice infrastructure with 5 different services and they all get touched by that transaction, you get all of that data back, and then you can pick exactly which attributes you want to assert against, which is that's how you avoid any mocking. That's how you avoid any plumbing you have to write. That's how you avoid the complexity and the headaches of, oh, dude, I have to do these 7 things to even just write one assertion. So you're basically taking away all of that pre-existing or pre-needed setup because you already have your traces. And what's cool about that is that hooks into your development lifecycle as well, because if you can see exactly what your system is generating regarding the traces, you can also validate the trace data. So you can also fix your traces if your trace instrumentation is not as good as it should be. So if you're not following rules, or if you have conventions, or basically open telemetry semantic conventions that you need to follow, if you're missing some of those, you can also go back and fix those before you even push the code to production. So this can be a gateway of sorts. So this can be a pre-merge set, or a step that you can set up. So all of these things, I think, they should allow testing to take a shift to, yeah, this is what we should do whilst we're developing. This is literally observability driven development, because we can ping our API and see exactly what the trace is. Do we like it? Is it bad? We can immediately set up test cases or test specs based on what the system is generating. So no black boxes, no nothing. This is all real data. And what's more important to say is that it's also fully open source. So Tracetest is fully open source, part of the CNCF landscape, MIT license. You can jump in, add whatever PR issue, whatever you want, and the team will jump on it. If you want to use it in your infra, you can. It's quite literally just another container that you slap into your infrastructure, which is something we're going to be showing a bit later on. But that's literally it. The infra makes it so simple that you connect it to your trace data store, you connect it to Tempo, and you're just good to go. It's incredibly, it's a native experience to, if you're already using CNCF tooling, is just very, very native to, and very nice. I'm going to say nice to get started with. Yeah, I hope that answers the question roughly.
Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to hear from Paul, actually, because Paul's been the biggest internal proponent of Tracetest. I think I heard about Tracetest from Paul. Why do you like it so much?
It's just cool. All things are cool like that. Yeah, no, it was kind of nice. I did a presentation for one of my local Kubernetes meetups, and then we presented on Tracetest after having worked with Ken and Oscar on the extension for K6. And that's where I got my first exposure to it. And it was just kind of like, it's like, wow, you have this nice user interface where you can go, and with that trace data, you can actually, see the progression through all the different microservices, and then a nice way to be able to go and put those assertions on there. So you can say, yeah, this database call should never be more than, 100 milliseconds or something, and then to be able to assert on that. And I don't know. It was, with K6 already too. That was so cool. And then with Tracetest on there, that was just, I don't know, da bomb, as the kids would say. So, but no.
I think you're a little late there. Yeah, I don't think kids say that anymore.
No? Oh man, I'm aging myself again.
Yeah, I think so.
I still don't know how to use TikTok. So I mean, I'm very old.
Oh my God, I don't get it either.
I don't get it, right? So
I haven't, I haven't run the TikTok,
Okay, maybe you just need to back out of this, Paul. Just like end it there. No, but I do love about Tracetest that it is doing exactly what we were talking about, bringing testing into different previously separate activities, because a lot of people don't think of testing that occurs after something has been deployed, which seems silly. Like I said, it shouldn't be an individual layer that just goes over everything. It should be incorporated really closely into every activity, including the observability part.
Yep.
So, Adnan, what are you sharing with us today?
Yeah, I have a super short demo, well, a super short slide and a demo as well, which is I just want to do a quick rundown on why I think tracing is amazing and why I think Grafana has hit the nail on the head with both Grafana itself and then Tempo as a trace data store. And then from there, I do want to show you just a use case of what it looks like when you find an exception in a trace, how hard it can be to even find it, and then how to use Tracetest to basically make sure that issues like that never happen again. So if you see an issue in production, you can set up a trace-based test through Tracetest to make sure and you validate that that use case or that error never happens again. So I would love to just run through that. And I'll
Yeah,
say,
let's go
first
for
and
it.
foremost, tracing is
Demo.
the bomb. The
See, the kids are still saying it
You think
so
Adnan is a kid?
compared to me.
I'm very old on the inside. On the outside, I'm just
There
very
we go.
pale.
An old soul.
But yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think tracing is the future of observability, and it's great because all of these things that we're building right now, all of these cloud native apps we're building right now, distributed apps, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, we finally know what's happening when we're using tracing. But the problem that I think there arises from that, that spike, how observability has grown, is that testing just it hasn't followed that curve. We're still kind of using these old, sorry, Paul, old versions, old versions of testing.
Burn.
Ouch.
And then the point here is that if we already have observability it's as awesome as it is, why don't we use that data that we're capturing and actually use the trace as part of our testing strategy? It's very logical after somebody has actually said it for the first time. Like, okay, so we have all of this data that we're using for production troubleshooting and issues. I mean, we can also just use it in testing as well because we already have it. And I think the issue that we have to solve right now is how do we fix the development lifecycle? Right now, it's quite flawed because testing is not part of it, as Nicole said, and we don't have a way of doing observability-driven development the right way or properly, so to say. And I think that's what I think the solution here can be, is that if we use Grafana for tracing, and then we hook in Tracetest for the trace-based testing based on all of these traces that we're already gathering in Grafana, we can both monitor and test our microservices by using distributed tracing. And I think that's where Tracetest is a perfect fit. And that's what I want to show in the demo. Now, this is a simple graph. Also, this is the GitHub repository. If you want to follow along with the demo, just jump over to the link. You can open up the samples. They're all there. You can run everything that I'm going to be running now. You can run that yourself and see how that works. And the point of this PokeShop sample API, microservice API that we have is that this is what a simulation of a real world example would be. You have an API, you have some caching in Redis, you have a RabbitMQ, you have a message queue, and then you have some workers that get triggered by message queues, and then you have everything getting stored in Postgres asynchronously. You don't really know what's going on in this worker, really. There is no proper way of testing this. There's no proper way of testing if the RabbitMQ message queue is broken or not. It's just kind of prayer driven. It's like you just hope it works, right? And then people tell you
Prayer driven. I love that.
I'm gonna trademark that one. I love that word.
Prayer driven development.
Yeah, it's I love that. No, but it's just horrible. It's just horrible, And the thing that I want to show you here is that I already have this running. So I'll just ping a curl request against. Let me figure out if I can show my entire screen. Oh, damn! I have to screen present my entire screen. Give me a second.
That's all right.
Well,
and I'll do the share screen, and I'll do the entire screen.
So I actually really love the PokeShop thing because it's an open source one, right? I've used it in demos as well, and what it does for people who don't know is it just returns. It provides API endpoints, and then when you hit them, it returns information about Pokemon, which how can you not like that? Yeah.
And it's a perfect example because I mean it's simple, it's fun, and also who doesn't love Pokemon, right? And that's basically what we're doing here is that I use this simple curl request. So I'm doing a post request. Let me zoom in a bit more so you can properly see what's happening. I use this post request. I'm hitting the import endpoint, and I'm passing in an ID, which is number 6, which is Charizard. So if I hit this import, I'm going to import a Charizard into my Pokemon Pokédex or whatever kids call it nowadays. And then if I want to actually see what's happening, I can do a get request, and I can see, okay, so the latest Pokemon is actually Charizard. Awesome. So this API works, right? It works perfectly fine. I can post stuff. I can get stuff, and my total count is 17. So I have 17 Pokemon. But what happens if I get a bit nasty and I say I want to import Pokemon number 9, 99999999, and then this returns fine. So obviously this should work, right? So it does it. If I go in and say, let me get it, it's still 17, and my last Pokemon is Charizard. So this broke silently somewhere. So I'm not sure why it broke. I don't know what's happening. Apparently it works fine, but it doesn't, right? So this is a natural step in the progression where, yeah, I need to hook up Grafana and I need to see what's happening. I need to hook up my distributed tracing, and I want to know exactly what's happening in these services after my initial API request. So I want to know what's happening in my RabbitMQ, in my worker, and in my database, because obviously I can't see that. So the natural progression would be, yep, let's hook in our Grafana. And by Grafana, it's basically just 3 steps. You have the collector, the OpenTelemetry collector, which is the main, let's say, router or forwarder of all traces. So you send all of your traces to the collector, and the collector forwards all of that into Tempo, batches it, and does all of those fancy things. And then you use Grafana to query for these traces from Tempo, and then you can have a nice dashboard, and you can get to the root cause of what's happening. Now, the way that works, let me just pull up Grafana, and I can show you. Is it looks like so. I'm just adding a TraceQL so I can look for the import request. So all of the import traces that are getting generated. And if I run this query, I can look at the latest that we have. Just give me a second to reload. There we go. So I'm looking at the latest trace ID that my request generated. So that's the broken request that worked, but it didn't really work. So it failed silently. If I open that up, I can see on the right-hand side that, yeah, it looks fine up until I go to like step number 6 down the road. And it's this one. It says import Pokemon. Okay, attributes error true. Okay, if I open the events, I have an exception. Okay, so there is a problem. It happened 5 steps down the line in a import Pokemon span. Okay, so this, I can see 2 main problems here. The first one is, okay, before the problems, I can see the issue. Good, I can figure out what it is and I can fix it. Obviously, this is all troubleshooting in production. But the main issue I can see here is, first, this is very hard to see. I have to go 5 steps down. I have to figure out what everything is. And if I just look at this one, this looks quite okay. And then I scroll down and see, oh, okay, no, it's broken, right? So the first thing I have a problem with is that, how do I improve my instrumentation so it's easier to find and easier to understand? I also need to validate. I have a way of validating the trace so I know that it's actually good. So the instrumentation is good. And then the second problem here is that, how do I make sure this never gets into production? How do I stop this from ever happening again? And if I want an answer to this, I probably need some very intricate integration testing to make some very complicated setups to make sure this never happens again. But, I don't like being complicated. So what I end up doing is literally just saying, yep, let's just plug in Tracetest to that. We already have Grafana. Let's plug in Tracetest. And then the point of Tracetest is that it is quite literally another service you're running as part of your infrastructure. So the simplest way of showing it is if I pop up the code itself. I have my Grafana right here. This is a sample Docker Compose, whatever you're using, Kubernetes, whatever, it's all the same. And then you have just one more little Tracetest container. That's it. You have provisioning files and config files. It's very simple. You're configuring Postgres, so Tracetest stores all metadata in Postgres. Very, very simple. The provisioning is, yep, I want to make sure that on startup, I'm connecting to my Tempo. And I mean, obviously, this is Grafana Office Hours, so you know how Tempo works. You're connecting to the gRPC, and that's it. I mean, it's no magic, right? It's no magic. If you want to use Tempo in Grafana Cloud, all the same. You can use HTTP, you can use gRPC. I mean, it's all the same. What's cool though is that if you want to connect this in Tracetest, you can also do it in the settings. So all of this provisioning is just optional if you don't want to hassle with the UI. If you want to do it manually in the UI and save that after the fact, you can do that as well. You can see that this reflects what we have in the provisioning. So it's very straightforward. There's no real magic. If you want to test whether the connection works as well, you get that test as well. If you mess up, let's say you mess up and say 4, and then you want to see that it works, it's going to say, nope, you messed up the port. The port checking is not correct. We can't connect. If we change it up and say, and it works perfectly fine. So that's the magic of the setup, and that's pretty much it you need regarding the setup. The rest of it is quite literally running tests. Now, if we take the curl request I ran a moment ago, which is just an import, I can go ahead and create a new test with the import. It's going to be an HTTP request, and because I set up a demo, I can just import the demo. And obviously, I'm using the same API. Well, this is actually running in Docker Compose, so this is the Docker network instead of using localhost. That's just same thing. So I'm running my post request, and I want to make sure that I'm importing, again, Pokemon number 6. Go ahead and run that. Let's see what happens here. So this main screen, this is very simple, standard testing scenario, test tool. You get a response. You can run some assertions based on the response. You can run some assertions based on the response time, etc. This is all standard stuff. What isn't really standard stuff is if I pop into the trace tab, my first problem I had, I can already solve it here. So I'm getting an analysis of the quality of my trace. And based on this analysis, I can improve my trace score, which means that, okay, so I'm having some issues with my semantic conventions. I can scroll down and see, okay, so the import is a problem. If I click on it, I can see, okay, so I'm missing attributes, HTTP target. Okay, cool. So I can go back and fix this. I can do this after the fact. I can do it even before I push it to production or push it to GitHub. So this is a very, very nifty thing where you can validate before you merge your code. And I think this is really, really magical.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that seems to be newer than from when I last messed with Tracetest. Is that a fairly new feature, the analyzer?
It is. We pushed it out. It's in beta right now, but I mean, honestly, it's ready. It's freaking gorgeous, and it
nice.
does its job. What's cool is you can also set your acceptable score. So let's say you want to make sure that your acceptable score is 95 or whatever.
Yeah.
If it was, this test would fail. So if I pop back to the settings and say, okay, so in the analyzer, I want to make sure that my minimum score is, let's say, 90. I save that up and I go back to the test. And let's say I rerun the test once again. This score is going to stay the same. It's going to stay 81. And now the test is going to fail because I changed the analyzer. And this is something we did add. I think it was almost a month and a half ago. So yes, you can see that it failed right now. We added it a month and a half ago. It was actually a fun story because it was part of an internal hackathon. So we did an internal hackathon, and we figured, I mean, this is something we call the dream, like the dream, as in we want the developer to actually get help when they're writing instrumentation. We want people to have an easier time writing their instrumentation, because have you ever Googled OpenTelemetry documentation semantic conventions? Have you ever looked for the semantic conventions? I haven't. I have. You know how fun it is? It's like integration testing. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, you know? Integration testing microservices. That's how much fun it is. So getting all of that, because it's just distributed across different documentation sites, different resources. So there's just a lot of stuff going on, right? And getting all of that centralized and getting links to how you can fix it, it's just amazing. Even this, I mean, we have an internal documentation as well where, okay, so I want to fix this. I can go to my analyzer documentation and it shows me, okay, so required attributes are, here's what you need to do. It's just hand holding at its finest.
That's pretty cool. Is that using ChatGPT? No, I'm just kidding.
Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. This is all human GPT. No AI. But that's a GPT. That's a really good. That's a good point. We could eventually put some ChatGPT in here, like write a test that does XYZ and then just figures it out. You know.
There you go.
Be kind of cool.
So can you talk to us about the semantic conventions? What are they, and why do we need to care about them?
Well, I mean, the simplest way of saying it is that there are certain conventions in the OpenTelemetry standard that you need to be following to make sure that your traces are adhering to those conventions. Those are just standards that the OpenTelemetry community set, and then everybody should follow them, right? Not everybody does. That's the thing, and I think the reasoning behind that is that they're very hard to find, and that's the logic behind why we wanted to add it here. So one option might be, so let's say here, right here. So every span, if it's an HTTP span like this one, needs to have certain attributes. And these attributes need to be universal across all of the spans that have this HTTP as its namespace, or it's as its, let's say, attribute namespace. And that's pretty much it. There's not really a lot of magic to it. It's just standardization and making sure that all of your spans use the standards that the OpenTelemetry community has set. Hopefully that makes sense to people.
Yeah, what I really like about this is you've demonstrated a few different ways to validate the output. One is that you can set what you're looking for, but another one is all of these standards that are kind of like just for best practices sake. These are things that you should always have for any endpoint that you're looking at. So these are less specific and just more general ones. But even those general ones, a lot of people don't look at those. So I think it's really cool that you have those as well. And you also have, so what are the common problems? Those are separate to the conventions.
Yeah. So the thing here is that the analyzer itself, it operates on a way of importing plugins. So every single one of these little accordions here is a separate plugin. So we're obviously planning on adding more, and then because it's open source, the community can contribute as well for whatever plugin that they might want. The common problems here are common issues like you should prefer using DNS instead of IP addresses. So that's a common issue that you might have. One more thing on the plugin that we're using is a security plugin where, yep, you should use HTTPS instead of HTTP, and you should make sure that you're not leaking any API keys. So these are all these three are just the three first plugins that the team has implemented, and currently, yeah, those are the only three plugins in the analyzer. Now the hope is that the community will push this along further, and we'll get more plugins as time goes by.
No, that's cool. It's like an architecture linter.
It is. We even called it the
Yeah,
linter.
exactly. Yeah. That's really cool. We have a troll comment from Mihail here saying we should make
Yeah.
new standards that everybody will follow.
Right.
Yeah. No, but there is like standards are difficult, right? They're useful to a point, but if there are too many standards or too many or they're too disparate, like you were saying, Adnan, that one of the difficulties with the OTel semantic conventions is that they're just scattered across different places, then it becomes really difficult. And having something like this that puts it all in one place is that much more useful.
I agree.
So you said these three, the OTel semantic conventions, the common problems and security, those are all plugins. So that doesn't come bundled in.
These three, they all do come bundled in, but you can
Oh,
also
okay.
choose. Yeah, you can choose which one you want to enable, which to disable, and then you can choose
I see.
the acceptable score, so the rate at which it will either pass or fail a test. From the get-go, so by default, once you do install Tracetest and get it up and running, our default analyzer setup is that the minimum score is 0, so nothing will interfere with your test specs. The analyzer itself won't interfere with the test specs, and we make sure that the analyzer is enabled with all of the plugins actually enabled. Now, if you do want to disable something, you can just enable the conventions, you can just enable security. So that's all something that you can pick and choose. Now, once we do start developing more plugins, and once if the community wants to start developing more plugins, they will eventually all be bundled in here in the analyzer section. And then you can just pick and choose which one you want, enabled or disabled.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear too that you guys did this through a hackathon project, which is really cool because that's I mean with Grafana we have internal hackathons as well, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty interesting to see what kind of ideas and things like that can come out of that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was an internal hackathon. So because CubeShop is the accelerator that's supporting Tracetest among other projects, we all did an internal where all of the project leads and all of the project development teams, we just sat together and said, oh, okay, let's brainstorm on top 2 ideas and just execute on them. Just make a POC version, and then if it's worth implementing into the tool itself, let's just do it, right? And that was what I think was super valuable with the hackathon, is that this was something that it's one of those boulders that never really start working on, but you really want to,
Yeah.
until somebody says, "Oh, yo, this is going to be awesome," and then you
Yeah.
get the validation from the hackathon that it was super awesome, and then it just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, it's very
So you
cool.
said that Tracetest is open source. What part is open source and what part is, part of the SaaS platform?
So right now we don't have a SaaS platform as of yet. So that's currently something that we're planning on building out. I don't know, the team doesn't know exact timelines, but it should be ready by end of this year. So if you're right now, all of it is open source. So the Tracetest, so what you're looking at right now is the web UI for the Tracetest server. We also have a Tracetest CLI. It's all fully open source. And yeah, once the SaaS comes along, it's just going to make it simpler to run the server. You're not going to have to manage your infrastructure. You're not going to have to manage your environments, your whatever. Really, it's just going to be a lot less hassle, because I think that's right now. If you want to have a quick setup, like a VS Code setup, where you're going to get the developer feedback loop with your trace testing, it's just simpler to have an external server running instead of bugging your DevOps people to set up a server for you. It's also going to be simpler for test reuse. So let's say you have tests running on a regular basis. Right now, a lot of people just throw away the trace test server once they're done running their tests in CIs. So they don't really have a historical overview of all of their tests, right? Because they don't run a persistent server anywhere. And that's going to be super simple once we have a SaaS, because you just send everything to a SaaS, and then you get a dashboard overview of all of your tests, and then you just keep it there. So that's also going to be a simpler way of managing your tests. Yeah, I think the analyzer is freaking cool. And then obviously, apart from the analysis itself, you can write the test specs, which is what I think is definitely most magical. We even had a community member. He's actually running this as part of a microservice architecture, and he's using Tracetest to make sense of his traces. And he even said, "Yo, my team, we're building tests in minutes instead of days." And I was like, "What? What? How did that even?" And he was super serious. He's like, "Yeah, the engineers are building tests in minutes instead of figuring out plumbing and doing complex integration tests in multiple days." So I think that case is really mind blowing, that you can actually do that. And that's what I think. One of the other problems I had figuring out this microservice architecture is that writing test scenarios is easy, but the plumbing is hard. And then I really want to show you what the adding a test spec would look like if you just take away all of the plumbing. Your plumbing is already the distributed trace you have. So if you pop in and say, "Yo, I want all of my status codes to be 200 for my HTTP spans," save that up, and that's it. You already have a test spec running for your HTTP spans. So all of them right now need to be validated that they are returning 200. And then that's a simple test, right? That's a very, very straightforward test. But what if we want to test, let me zoom in a bit here. What if we want to test what's happening after the message queue? So I have a message queue. After the message queue, I want to go ahead and import something into both Redis and my database. Well, how do I know this is going to work? Well, let's pop in, open up the attributes, and say, yeah, so I want to make sure that this span always exists. You can add a test spec and say, yep, pick that span. I want to make sure that the selected spans is equal to 1. And I always want to make sure that that's true. So validate that this span always exists. After the message queue. Wonderful. So I've just set an assertion that is validating that every time this current test runs, it's always going to validate that the span after my message queue is working or is even there. It exists at all. So that's going to validate that my message queue is actually functioning as it should, which is something that would take me days to figure out if I didn't have this.
Your consumer's not running. What?
Exactly. So, and then I go,
Yeah.
what is a consumer? And then I go like, then I do have to do that, and then I figure out how to debug that. So it's a lot of you're basically setting so many safety nets here, even before something goes to production. Or you can trigger GitHub actions every 5 minutes, and then you can periodically. It's you can do pretty much whatever you can think of, and that's something that's also pretty magical with the databases here. If I go and say, yo, I want to check my Redis, and I want to validate that the Pokemon I'm adding is actually Charizard. Let me go ahead and say I want the database payload. So I want to create the test spec on the database payload. And I want to make sure that it's equal to this Pokemon 6. So I want to validate that Redis is using Charizard. If I save that, I'm getting another assertion on my Redis instance as well. So this is another level of safety net. So I'm validating against Redis, and then I can also go a step further and say, okay, so if I pick my Postgres instance, I want to make sure that the database result for my Postgres instance contains the name Charizard. Let's do Charizard. Validate that the Postgres has Charizard. This is another level of validating that this API is actually doing what I want it to do. And if I save that all up, I'm getting this nice list of all of my assertions. And if I rerun the test, I'm going to get a fresh test run with all of these assertions validated. But once this is running, I had another idea. So if I jump back to Grafana for a second, and I can see right here, the error we were looking at in Grafana was actually in the import, and it was actually an event on the span that had an exception. So what if I want this to never happen again? I can pull in this trace ID. I can go back to Tracetest. Obviously, this is all returning fine, so this test passed fine. If I can jump in here and say, I want to create another test, but this time I want to create it and trigger it by a trace ID. I can go in and say, let's do a postmortem on what happened. And I want the variable for this trace ID. I just say trace ID to keep it simple. And in the trace ID from the failed execution, pop into the trace over here, and let's see what happens. So if I can use this as a post-mortem, let's figure out what happened, and then write a test so it never happens again. So once this is done fetching the trace, let's give it a second. Maybe I messed up the trace ID. Let me just pull that in again. There we go. Just reload. Maybe I messed up the. So this is what happens with live demos.
It's okay.
Well, we can also just rerun the curls that should break. It's just like that. Let's rerun it.
It's probably DNS. It's always DNS, right?
It's always networking. Always networking. We can stop that. Let's just rerun it again, but we'll grab a fresh trace ID. There we go. This is a fresh one. And it's still breaking. Let's grab this fresh trace ID. Back. Let's rerun the test with this trace ID. Yeah, so now it should work fine. Yeah. So what happens here is that this is going to rerun, it's going to run a test on this trace, and it's going to pull up exactly what the trace looks like. Now, the kicker here is that if I open up the attributes and I'd say I want to look at the import Pokemon, which was the trace span that was actually breaking, I pull up the trace events and I can see, yeah, I have an exception here. What if I do create test spec? And let's say I want this to not contain an exception. Save that up, and I can make sure. Not right now. I have a test case, a test spec that can validate that this exception never happens again. So this test is going to fail every time it finds an exception, which is what, it's freaking awesome. So if I save that up, I can also do this same thing. I can do the same thing for my other test that I was just showing. I can pop in and say, okay, let's make sure we add that same test spec, and go, okay, so import Pokemon. I want to add a test spec to my import Pokemon. I want to make sure that the span events, so this one, never contains an exception. Awesome. So what happens here is that I'm also validating right now the same issue that I saw in Grafana, is that I want to make sure that it never happens that I have an exception in this import Pokemon. And to just show you that it's doing as it's working as it should, we can just pop in a bunch of 9s here and rerun the test and see what happens, whether that assertion is going to fail or not. So yeah, whilst this is running, let me just double check whether there's something we want to go over again. Yeah, we can also talk about the automate, so the automation a bit as well at the end. But I think this is incredibly beautiful that you can actually go in and say, okay, so look at the import Pokemon now, and we can see, yep, we're actually failing this test spec where it did not, it did find an exception, so this test failed, and we can rerun. We can set this assertion on any other test that we want against this import API. So yeah, so I love this, that you can do post-mortem testing. And you can see, oh, so this went bad. I can go back. I can test it on the trace ID, and then I can figure out my assertion, and I can put it on my test that I want to run.
Yeah, that is nice. I mean, I and Nicole, I feel like we should have like a soundboard or something too, to, have little applause and that, because yeah, that's cool. So you can take this actual situation or scenario that was happening in production, and then you can bring that into your development environment to, add that spec, and then start applying that and making sure that, anything that's being developed is addressing that, or, so that, like you said before, you can stop it with your CI before it goes into production, any other changes. So you can make sure that you squash that bug going forward.
I love that you like immediately went to the developer experience in this, because I went to the tester experience, and this kind of broke my brain when I first heard about it, because as a tester, if you wanted to test microservices, one of the most difficult things is if you go into it with a mentality of this is a black box, then all you can ever test is the end result, the end response. Right. And sometimes the end response is either so useless, like it just says 404 not returned or whatever, or that it's slow. It's like, well, where did it break? You don't know. You just know that it did break, or sometimes the end result is actually a false positive when it says everything's okay, but actually something happened somewhere along the way.
Right.
So the way that I used to test like these ones where there are a lot of components, which is, all systems these days, would be to send individual requests to target, like, okay, is the database okay? Is this part okay? Is the queue okay? Or is it getting full? And then have observability everywhere. But this is kind of like a different way of thinking, where instead of doing the testing at the beginning, when you're sending the requests, you're just doing like an end-to-end test that is instrumented, and so everything is traced, and then after the fact you're going in and checking the results of every step along the way. So I don't have to care and specifically script for testing every individual component. And you were talking about the dangers, or I guess the tedium of having to use a mock. That is sometimes what you have to do when you're trying to isolate every little bit of the whole chain. But if you're just using distributed tracing and doing it after the fact, then you just need to do the end-to-end flow.
Yep.
Agree. It's again, I mean, black box testing, it has its place. It's not bad. Like none of this is bad. It's you need to
Yeah.
figure out what what hammer you should use for what nail. You shouldn't be using a hammer to screw a screw. You should be using a hammer to screw to hit. I mean, you get the point, right? I'm not even.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly still has its place, but this is a very common problem, and sometimes it's not enough just to get something at the end that's like pass or fail. It's like, yeah, but where? Where did it fail and how?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Did you want to talk about the CI/CD part of it quickly?
Yeah, we can do a quick rundown of the automation just so everybody gets a gets a point of view. So the
Awesome.
fourth tab, so the last tab we do have here is the automate, which is just a more or less a fancy way of saying here's how you can run this as quick as possible in your CI. Now, the way you do run it via the CLI in your CI pipelines is you get this YAML file, which is a YAML representation of exactly the test that you set up visually. Now, if you want to do a developer first approach, you can write this YAML file in your VS Code or whatever tool you're using, and then you can run this file via the CLI right away. So we don't have a preference on what is better, what is worse. You use whatever tool you want, and then on the right you get a really short sample of the CLI command you should be running to trigger this test. So I can also just if you copy this file, I can pop over to my VS Code and I can say, let me just put it in my test file. I can jump over to my terminal, and let's say I want to run this file. So I'm adding in this little -w, which is the -w means wait for test to complete, which is basically just going to wait for this test to finish and then show you the output in the terminal. Whilst this is running, I can also say something that I think is very convenient, that we have this run CLI via Docker image. So if you don't want to install the CLI, if like you just don't want to have the hassle of installing the CLI, but you have Docker already installed, you can just pull in the official KubeShop Tracetest latest image and run the CLI that way, because the image itself comes packaged with CLI, obviously, which is also very convenient for any CI, like GitHub Actions, for example. You select the Tracetest image as your base image. You don't have to install the CLI; it's just there, and you can run it right away. So it's for convenience. It's very, very nice to have that as well. Now, if I pop back to the terminal, this is what the output that you get. So if you do run the test, you'll get, so here's the name of the test, and then here are all of the assertions that we already set up. And then I can obviously click this link to jump back to the browser or the web UI, or I can just go back and select the latest test run from the list of tests. So 1 minute ago, so this one. So it's a very, very convenient thing to have this way of automating and running it via the CLI. We can also do a deep link. So a deep link is basically you can copy this link and run it in your browser, and this is going to automatically trigger the test and then show you the test output as well. So that's another shorthand. We had a community member that was actually wanted to run
That's
tests from
cool.
the front end. Yeah, it's he wanted to run it from the front end, and he was, yeah, I mean, if I could just open it in a browser, click a button, and then it opens it in a browser, that'd be kind of magical. And we were like, well, that's actually a really good idea. It's actually a really good idea. So we ended up adding that as well. And then this is going to expand with time, so we're going to add more running techniques here as well. And that's pretty much it. So the base of it is that you're using the file itself, and then if you really want to go into details, the file is very I'm going to say it looks as normal as it should. You have your trigger section. So let me just go ahead and mark that. So you have your trigger section, which is quite literally uh, the HTTP request and the URL and the post method. So the same thing we were doing in the UI. And then the test specs is a direct representation of what we were doing in the UI as well. So the selector for the span, you're getting your assertion. This is the assertion. This is the selector for the next span, and you're getting your assertions. So it's very I'm going to say logical because it looks exactly the same as it does in the UI. So there's no real confusion there, and it's YAML because everybody loves YAML.
Do we though?
No. I think it's the most hated. I don't know why the hate though. I love YAML. I think YAML is great. It's either that or like JSON. And come on,
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
until you
those
get
options.
an alignment thing, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's me regarding the demo. I would love to
Awesome.
continue the conversation. If you have any questions, I just wanted to add that in. If anybody has any question, we can answer that as well.
Yeah, well, we're coming up on the hour, but where can people go to find out more about Tracetest or ask some questions?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can pop into our GitHub repository. So it's at github/cubeshop/tracetest. And you can also pop into our Discord. So the easiest way is probably just to, I have a slide up with all the contacts. So you can jump into our Discord, our community Discord. You can pop into just go to our website, tracetest.io. And that's pretty much it. We have a really nice community page right now on the website. So if you want to contribute, if you want to do whatever really to either support as in GitHub issues or support in writing content, or let's say you have a use case where you loved using Tracetest for something, I mean, I would be thrilled to read all of that. So if you have any submissions, I'm happy to listen to you. Or if you just want to chat with the team, you have some feedback, you can jump into Discord and talk to the team. So that's it's all nice.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us. It was really great to hear about Tracetest again. Kind of preaching to the choir here. Paul and I are both fans.
Yeah. And everybody go to the repository and star it. How can you guys only have like just over 600 stars? Get on there. This is much love to Tracetest. It's really, really a cool project. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do.
Yeah, it's only going to grow even more. I think the stars definitely. I think I'm not doing a good enough job with the promo. I swear it must be me.
No. No, look, maybe you just need to have more of these little guys.
More plushies.
Ship more plushies. I think that's gonna be a help.
All right. Cool. We are taking a 1 hour break, at least Paul and I will, and then we will be back on the same channel and on the K6 channel, this time for K6 Office Hours, where we are talking about gRPC and the new K6 experimental module for gRPC. Thank you everyone for watching, and grab a coffee or something and then head right on back. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye everyone.
Yeah.